And we're live. Welcome, everyone, to another high vibe conversation. I'm your host, 𝗔𝘀𝗵𝗵𝗁. With me today and the amazing women, we have Dr. Ashok Bhattacharya, and the women, as you already know and trust, Dorit Carlson, Jenny Langren, Stina Marie, and Linda Vetrus-Nichols. So we welcome you. Today we'll be talking about healing courage. And Ashok, can you tell us a little bit more about who you are and why this topic resonates with you so much?
Well, I'm a lot of things, but the first thing I am is a family person. Second thing I am is a musician. And not last, but just another way to identify myself is I'm a medical doctor. And I became a medical doctor because I was fascinated with the feeling I had when I thought I could heal somebody. And I was just a kid at the time. I thought, wow, this is such a powerful feeling. So that's my dopamine. But at the same time, I realized that there's a lot of pain out there. When I became a psychiatrist, I realized that my job isn't to necessarily cure people, it's to help people to find their cure for themselves. And when they do that, that empowers them. It's not to help them to become dependent on me. It's to help them to become dependent on themselves and to find that power. And for me, when someone discovers that, where they can become a self-healer, not only can they continue to do that for themselves, they can pass that on to somebody else. I'll leave it there.
I love that you're helping people find the courage to heal themselves, and that what power that is. I think that's so beautiful. And you mentioned just behind the scenes a moment ago with me that you think of yourself as the anti-psychiatrist psychiatrist, right?
Did I say that to you?
You did. I'm letting it slip a little bit because I think that's so brilliant there to not get caught up in some of the stigma that's associated with people who see psychiatrists sometimes. So for anybody who doesn't have the courage necessarily yet to acknowledge that they might not be feeling okay and need that extra support, I think that lends a little bit more trust to coming to see somebody like you who can help them find that for themselves. Is that why you started calling yourself an anti-psychiatrist?
Well, this is the reason why I call myself an anti-psychiatrist. He's holding up the DSM. And the problem with that is that I'm supposed to find who the person is I'm working with in that book. And that's an egregious situation. That means we're actually pigeonholing people's human experience. And I came into psychiatry in 1985, and trauma and the conversation about trauma was just beginning to start to happen. Complex PTSD wasn't even on the map in that point. And so there I am at 25 years of age, and I'm starting, to practice therapy, and I'm realizing no one's talking about what's most important, which is the narrative, which is the person's story. What has happened to them, not what we think has happened to them, but what they feel has happened to them from their perspective. And when I started getting into that, I realized I was discovering a very powerful healing journey that I could help people with. The problem is it's got nothing to do with DSM or psychiatry. Yes, I prescribe medications when indicated, but that's not the solution to someone's problem. The solution to someone's problem is much more embedded in the capacity to find a safe way to tell their story to themselves and somebody else and heal from that place. I'll leave it there.
Jenny, did I see you flash your mute just now, or did I preemptively just visualize that?
I didn't actually, so maybe you did just visualize it. But of course, I'm happy to jump in, having done the inner work of healing through trauma as well. And what comes up for me when I think of healing courage is, it is about being present with my story. It's about being present with the parts of me that I might experience being hidden from me or being incomplete. And it takes a huge amount of vulnerability and courage for me to be present with those parts that, society is telling me are imperfect And like Linda says, like, I don't know why there's a word for perfect, because there's nothing that is perfect. But those are the ideals that we hold. And it's when I realize that, not everything is going to fit into those ideals, and I get to ground myself and talk about myself the way that it truly is, and the way that I see myself, and the way that I find myself. And it takes a lot of courage. And I know firsthand what it's like to go to someone who is looking at me, but is not truly seeing me, but seeing like the theories of things, seeing, what they studied, but not truly seeing me. And I so resonate with what you're sharing, Ashok, that we get to set those theories aside and be completely present with the person that is before us. And it is that shared human experience. And it is leaning into empathy. And I know that you're the king of empathy, so I want to hear more about that as well. I can ramble on, but some of the things that are coming up for me. Thank you, Shal.
Ashok, I see you've flashed your heart.
Well,
I know you're just eager to dig
flashed
into
my heart
this
to
empathy.
support Jenny's statement. She used a couple of very powerful words like vulnerability, and my heart goes out to her and anyone who's struggled and had issues of PTSD, including myself over the years, because it's important that we open the dialogue. But I want to challenge something that she accused Linda of saying, to do with mathematics. And I use math all the time when I'm working with my clients, because math can be perfect, right? That's why people like math, because it's one place where there's no fuss about what 2 + 2 is. I'm not going to get into the philosophy of this. When I work with people, I try to see if what they're telling me adds up. And when it doesn't, I know there's a part of themselves that's not in the room, not in the room with me. They're probably hiding that part of themselves. They might even not know that it exists, because they've hidden it from themselves for sometimes decades. And I feel the pain of that as I'm talking about this. But when something doesn't add up, I ask, there might be something more to this. Can we go into that? Can we go a bit deeper? And this is oftentimes a person that's been deeply traumatized. They're speaking to an older male guy, etc. And when they know that I'm interested in that other piece, then that piece can come out. Then they start to add up to themselves. Once someone's adds up and they can find those missing pieces, the math of them can become much more tolerable for them to move forward with.
The math of them. That's so beautifully put. I've never thought about how things add up in that way. And I don't particularly care for math, but this makes it more palatable too, to think about it as a piece of you or a piece of somebody else that might be missing or hidden that you just can't see yet. And so I love how you're talking about helping people find that part of themselves.
Well, if I can just hog a little bit here, when I got into psychiatry back in the 80s, I realized what I was being trained was wrong. A lot of people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia or bipolar or borderline personality were people with trauma, and it was not being talked about. And I unfortunately, I had to suppress my idea, because if I discussed that with my supervisors, I would have been kicked out of the programs, because they're my trainers, they're my bosses. And it was 4 years of agonizing pain for me to know that I was right, that some of these people were just had terrible trauma histories. But once they're diagnosed as psychotic or having schizophrenia, their story becomes invalidated because they're mentally ill and they can't source out the truth.
It takes a lot of courage to recognize that something that you've believed or taught to believe and think about yourself or for yourself is wrong. it takes a lot of courage to challenge that and to heal in your own way. I have a lot of feelings right now that are just bursting to come out. So I'm a little bit at a loss for words at the moment. I'm going to segue this conversation over to Linda, who's on the bottom of the screen right now, but certainly not on the bottom of my list for this conversation. I know you can talk more about the PTSD and the trauma and the child brain that might be traumatized on this. So what's coming up for you when we talk about healing courage?
Yeah, there is that. And listening to our wonderful guest here, just don't know all of his stories and his how he sees things. So thank you for sharing, because that is so me when it came to working in special education, and kids were getting all these labels, and actually they had food sensitivities or they had biochemical imbalances that could be easily changed through different therapies or whatever. So I have such a heart for what you experienced too. And I had my son like in 1981, and so I had my special ed licenses by then, and it was so frustrating that I finally went into private clinical work, and the parents would come to me and they'd be like, I know my kid can learn, and the teachers say they can't, and my child, actually, I learned a lot like my child. And like Ashok, you're like, yeah, math, it's perfect. And it's like, what? I never understood math, right? Stina would agree with you. Math is perfect. The only math I could get was like algebra. I can take really complicated things and like bring them down to the second grade level, though, just because I struggled so much in school myself. So dyscalculia, probably some dyslexia too. So thank you for sharing that piece, because it's so true. You don't, just have this label. I worked in a psychiatric day treatment center, and we had a psychiatrist on board with us, and he was way more like you, which is so cool. And I would just get the kids what they were interested in. Well, the kid with bipolar, I guess that increases the psychosis, So I learned. I was very anti-meds when I got in there, and I learned to respect meds. So that was a beautiful journey for me as well. What Shell's referring to is I'm a kinesiologist. So I muscle test like where a person's vibration is, then look at like David Hawkins' chart and be able to, explain how that might look in their life, or what I call the traumatized child, but it's not the age that someone was actually traumatized. It's more how they present in the world as an adult. And then that can actually be increased. And so I worked with a gal who her mom was mentally ill and her dad was a narcissist, and she really wasn't wanted at birth. And when I muscle tested her age, it came out 0, and I'd never have anybody come out 0, maybe a 3-year-old or 4-year-old. That's kind of average for a lot of people. And so in just working with her and helping her through that, she got up to like age 23. It was really incredible. And when you look at like schizophrenia, all kids are like schizophrenic. When you look at babies, all babies are dyslexic. And so until you become like one whole person, so to speak, which is about age 7 or maybe even towards the end of age 7, then you're no longer those schizophrenic personalities, if you will. And so in being able to talk to people that they're not odd, and even with the kids with special education, to be able to say, it's not you, it's your teacher. Your teacher doesn't understand how you learn. And then I taught the kids to advocate for themselves. And like kids would come to me like just looking down at the floor. And by the time they left, even after one session, they were looking me straight in the eyes. So to tap into someone's humanity and help them to understand that it's not them, there's something there, and working with that something instead of with them, so to speak, and pointing fingers at them, like Jenny was like, felt like she's just being theorized, is so beautiful. And I know Jenny was really lucky, got in with someone who was able to take her back to childhood memories and bring her forward. And you're rare. You're a rare bird there. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing in the world. I really appreciate you.
Well, I really appreciate this group, because I think what you're doing is you're championing a story that needs to be told. And Linda, I would just want to piggyback, if I can just take the mic for a second here, on something that you talked about that I think is very vital. And psychiatrists, as a rule, are generally a bit slow on the upkeep of this one. And that is measuring muscle tension. Our bodies start remembering from the moment we are able to remember, even maybe intrauterine memories.
Absolutely.
And our body, and people talk about body memories. Well, what are they? Our body remembers things, and that saturates our brain with experiences and feelings and thoughts. Now, you described a person who maybe wasn't wished for. If a child isn't bonded with a parent, or at least a loving person shortly after birth, that can create that doubt. Is this body wanted? Is this soul wanted? And I think something that I do in my office on a regular basis, encourage my patients to become physically active in their lives. And I can't do this, but there's a guy in Santa Cruz who takes trauma victims into the ocean and teaches them how to surf. And there's actually a show about this on Netflix called Resurfacing, and Brian Waters is the person, has this group. And it's changing the ethos of how these people experience themselves. Because if you think about it, when someone has bad trauma, they don't think they can think about anything else but that trauma. But when you're in the ocean dealing with a wave, you have to think about that wave. And that opens up this new possibility that I can think and experience things outside of this traumatic space I've been living in for most of my life. That creates a space that can be a place to grow and a place to come back to a new sense of healing, which is what we're talking about today.
I love that. And I love the dolphin work that is done as well, and equine therapy too, where the horses, they just know, and if you're struggling with control issues, a horse picks up on that right away, and you can't get a horse to do shit. So I appreciate all those wonderful therapies that are supposedly so outside of the box, and actually they're the ones that work.
Well, I'm definitely going to go watch Resurfacing now after this. I've written it down so that I don't forget the name, and I think I'm really going to lean into it, because I don't know how to surf. I'm not a pro at it. I have done it, like taken a class once before, but you're right. When you're in that moment and a wave is coming, or like you're about to go under, like you have no choice but to, all right, this is the way forward. We're going to do this, whether we're ready for it or not. And so I'm really interested in learning more about that story and watching it. So I'm definitely going to thank you for the suggestion there. Stina, I'm coming down to you. What's coming up for you when we're talking about healing courage?
I just wanted to re-quote something Ashok said, was finding a safe way to tell our stories to ourselves and someone else. He said that that's the space that he's holding for people, or how he works with someone. And I just thought that was really beautiful. And the trauma that we're talking about, and the experience of having an experience other than, the trauma, and learning that you can have that new experience, I think kind of plays into that internal safety. Something that I have experienced a lot of, and I'm now watching my 9-year-old kind of start to wrestle with, because I've definitely experienced this when I was younger, was not having ways to tell an accurate story to myself, or a whole story. So, when you're just locked into your own mind and perspective and thoughts, we tend to create the worst story Like, and so when you have relationships and family and community and support people that can offer you different perspectives and different thoughts and different ideas, you can have a more robust story. And as a writer, like that's literally what happens when you're, bring an editor in for a book. Like they have a little bit different perspective and they're going to say, oh, this isn't going to land quite right. Or there's something missing here. This doesn't make sense. Or why is this written this way? And, you have to start critically thinking about things in a little bit different way. And it's really challenging to do that. What I experienced as a kid was like this feeling that there's no way that my dad understood how I was feeling. He would say, I know exactly how you feel. And I would think, there's no way that you know how I feel because you're not having this experience. And my child is like parroting almost the same thing to me, is struggling with a classmate who is kind of doing this very subtle bullying, throughout the year, and is wrestling with that. And all of the parents, so myself, my ex-husband, their dad, and his partner, we're all saying that you have to stop feeding the bullying. You have to choose not to give it so much attention and energy, and we got to work on what you can do, because we can't really change that person's behavior other than you can speak up for yourself, you can stand up for yourself, you can tell the teacher, like we can still do those things, but we got to work on the way you're feeling and you're handling it. And it's like, well, it's kind of like, well, you've never had an experience like this one. And so it takes time to kind of wear you down, and it takes courage to have you come out of that experience, whether it's just as you age or you have some, like you hit rock bottom and you're like, I gotta have some help, to where you reach out to somebody and you're like, okay, something's not working here. Something about the way I'm telling myself these stories isn't working. And when I hired my own therapist, I specifically looked for somebody that was not like me. I did not want someone who I wanted to go to have a drink with. I did not want someone who I felt buddy with. And, I talked to a couple of different people, and there was somebody that I was like, we would get along so well. I'm definitely not going to hire you. Because I just was like, I don't need a cheerleader. I don't need a hype person. I need somebody who's going to challenge my perspectives and is going to offer me like a new way to think about things, and is going to kind of push me in ways that are going to be vulnerable and uncomfortable so that I can grow. Because I'm an overachiever. I'm a straight A student. I want to be successful. So if somebody just gives me a to-do list, I'm just going to do the to-do list. If somebody tells me how to be successful, I'm going to, I will fulfill it. I will do it. I have the willpower to follow through. But when someone tries to help me learn how to relax or have a hobby that doesn't have to be achievement oriented, my brain shorts out and I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, what is that? Joy, just doing something for joy. So having somebody that has been able to kind of poke at just the right, places to say, hey, there's something here that we can open up. Hey, there's something here we can open up. Has been really powerful. And it's a different kind of courage for me, because I have the confident, bold, outspoken courage. That's not a problem. That's how I overfunction. The courage for me is pulling back, slowing down, doing less, feeling like I don't have to make everything into a big achievement or project or thing to accomplish. So that's kind of been my journey with that, creating that safety and courage.
Ashok, did you want to add to that?
No, I wanted to support what
Okay.
Stina said. She said something that was really powerful and important for me. And as a therapist, it is my task to challenge the perspective of my clients. And when people have bad PTSD or complex PTSD, it's very frequent that the perspective that they come to therapy with is, I am never going to feel good about myself ever. I'm always going to feel this way. I will never feel good being me. And if I don't challenge that, I will fail them. And some of the most amazing moments happen in therapy when someone comes in and says, I did something different that made me feel good. I experienced some laughter, or more importantly, I experienced some hope about myself. When that starts to happen, as a therapist, you can begin to relax because they're going to find that pathway. And I think perspective really is if I'm two things. I'm a perspective changer, but I'm a soul catcher. And I think when you can help someone with a perspective, then they can help themselves with that. And that's a beautiful. So Stina, thank you so much for the way you put that. It was really well put. Thank you.
Stina, something that you shared about when somebody presents you with a way to enjoy yourself and have fun with that's not achievement based or oriented, I really resonate with that a lot. I can remember in my childhood kind of like sharing with my family, whether it's my parents or my siblings, about something that had happened to me or that I was going through, and being responded to, not as if the conversation was being had at me, not that I was present, that they were present in the moment with me, with all variations of that's not how that happened, or you're blowing it out of proportion, or it didn't, like what you're saying doesn't make sense. It was nobody ever came back at me with, well, I remember this a little bit differently, to share that, or to like fill in the missing pieces for me of what like my brain might have created, the story that I was telling myself. And you mentioned that your 9-year-old is kind of struggling a little bit to tell herself the versions of the story that like she needs to hear, as opposed to other things that may have actually been present, but she might be missing those pieces. And I am kind of like struggling in this moment, honestly, because I can relate to both parts of that. The not being able to find fun and joy in things because everything needs to be achievement based, and the invalidation that me sharing experiences created for me. Something that specifically is coming to mind right now is I remember, and I may have shared some variation of this memory before. I remember sitting in my room and I was tracing a picture of myself at camp, but I was sitting there tracing, and I found that very therapeutic. I wasn't doing it for any purposes other than to just like sit there and like experience the experience. And I remember my mom came in, and she was so blown away by the fact that I had drawn this picture. No, I traced it. I wasn't creating anything new, and I wasn't feeling overly creative. It was just the process for me, and like just like going through the motions. And within a week, I was signed up for painting classes and art lessons because they wanted to develop that into something more. It needed to be more than just like something that could just keep me calm and just be in that moment. And I remember then wanting to imitate other pictures in these classes, and I wouldn't create anything new. I wasn't drawing anything that I created out of my own imagination. I was always tracing or copying other pictures that already existed. And I remember bringing them home from time to time, and my parents being like, "That's it? This is what you got?" But I could never feel like I was just like enjoying that for myself. I like art for art. I like the process of getting messy or playing with it or tracing things just to like feel connected to whatever it is. Where I'm going with this is that it feels like in those moments, those conversations where I was trying to be courageous and feeling stripped of that by being told that it needed to be something more than what it actually was to me. And so the healing courage that I can bring to this perspective now, looking back, is that I still knew for myself that it didn't need to be more, but I was so in that frame of mind to not challenge what other people told me it had to be, that I suppressed it. But I still knew deep down that it wasn't more, that it was never going to be more, that it was what it was. The healing courage comes from me leaning into that now and not attributing the achievements and just letting things be. And I feel very connected to you when you're talking about having similar experiences. Same, but different. I know, but like there is fun in just doing things sometimes. And I wanted to just share that with you. So thank you. Dorrit. Last but certainly not least, when we're talking about healing courage, what's coming up for you?
Well, listening to all you guys, my mind is jumping all over the place because everyone is triggering a new message or a new memory. And I've been here like, oh, I'm going to talk about this. Oh, no, I'm going to talk about that. And just jumping back and forth. And at the end, I just gave up and I'm like, well, when it's my turn, it's just going to come out. So here it goes. I want to jump back to what Ashok was talking about with the body memory, because that's what a big part of what I've been working on for the past 6 years now. As a certified leadership by heart coach, we focus on finding those memories that are embedded in people's body and in their subconscious. So the way we work is that we use just questions to guide us. I would work with my eyes closed, just feeling the other person in front of me or via the screen, and just let the other person's answers and emotions, radiance, I don't know what to call it, just guide me to where the issue was. And one of those routes that we would go was to ask, where do you feel it in your body when you think about always arguing with your mother? When you think about your mother always making you angry, where do you feel that? For instance, and some might say, oh, I feel it here in my throat. I feel like it's heavy. I can't breathe. There's something. Yeah. Or someone would say, I can feel it in my stomach. Like a pit in my stomach. It's really painful. It's like it's sucking into my stomach. And I would then ask more like, does it have any color? Does it have any shape? How big is it? Things like that to kind of identify an object. And people come up with the most surreal things. One had a crab that was trying to choke her, like a huge crab trying to kind of take a chokehold on her. I've seen, I've heard people see like a huge, like a whirlwind, like a tornado in their stomach, like a big lead plate covering their entire, from the chest till their navel, things like that, that they tell me they're experiencing. And by addressing those entities, let's call them entities, they start asking them questions. And the questions that they ask will be like, when did this happen to you? When did it first appear? And they would get, the first time was when I was 5 years old and I stole something from the fridge and I was hiding under the kitchen table eating it, and my mom came in and she whooped me or something. You know, it could start something like that. And then we go further and it's like, why did this happen? And that's where most people get the surprise, because mostly it has happened to protect them from something. And now it's hurting them, but it came to protect them. So that's the big game changer, when they realize that this came in that time of my life to protect me from what I was experiencing at that moment. And they can kind of thank it for coming. But now I don't need you anymore. You know, you've stayed, you're welcome. What do you want to do next? You know, and then transform this entity into something that is more pleasant, that can help them, that can kind of stay and be a guidance for them, or they can just, some really hate it. so they just want to get rid of it. Yeah. And I've had people putting it in a jar, throwing it into the ocean. I've had some imagining that it was put on a cloud and it just sailed away. Just things like that. It's really up to them and their imagination. I never give them any suggestions of any kind. It's all coming from themselves, and that's what making it so powerful, because they see it. They can see it inside of their own mind, and so nobody has told them, you just do that and you just go there and feel this, but they're getting the message from themselves, and it's super, super interesting and powerful to see people heal in that way. I've healed myself in the same way. I spent the first 3 months getting a lot of that kind of coaching, so I've seen things and felt things myself, and I know how powerful it can be, and that it really works. So a lot of the people that I've talked to, including myself, has to have that healing courage. You have to be willing to open up, to see the things that are hiding there, and just face them to be able to move on. That's what I've found. Yeah.
Can I respond, Shell, to that comment that Dorrit made? And very, very powerful, Dorrit. Thank you for sharing that. And I see a lot of emotion in the room today as well, and I'm feeling some of it myself. Just to bore you for a few seconds here, Freud got into medicine in the late 1800s because he was fascinated with neurological symptoms, especially things like glove and stocking anesthesia, where a woman in her 20s would come into the office and not be able to feel her hand somewhere up to her elbow, which is not a neurologically possible thing. So he eventually began to realize these are psychological manifestations. The problem with the story is that the anesthesia is not the problem. It's what caused it is the problem. And the other thing is that we don't see smelling salts for fainting anymore, because back in those days, people would faint all the time, and people don't faint as much as they used to. What does that mean? That means that we're spending more time trying to be present and trying to be conscious for things, when really we're just struggling and struggling and struggling, instead of going back and looking at some of these stories that cause us to either have anesthesia of a hand or to faint. And I think that's why finding these stories, and I know it's not always safe to dig up everything. I've certainly made some people psychotic diving for stories back in the 80s when I was learning how to do this. But it's the stories that will set the person free once they find a safe place, especially when they share it with somebody else who is safe to do that with. And I want to thank you so much for the work you're doing, Dorrit. I'll leave it there.
Well, I'm going to take this opportunity to thank all of you for doing the amazing work that you're doing to help people find the courage within themselves to heal, to find the missing parts of themselves. Ashok, I want to thank you especially for joining us today to talk more about this. I've really learned from you and hope to keep learning from you on how to dive deeper on this. And even though I already feel pretty empathetic in a lot of situations, I know that I'm just scratching the surface on that. And so I look forward to sharing more conversations with you and these lovely women before us today. So thank you once again to everyone who's been part of this high vibe conversation. I know we've got some amazing comments as well from Tim West and Adama. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. You're in good company. This is a safe space for you to share, whether you're catching us here in real time or on the replay. Please feel free to share with us and add your thoughts to the conversation as well. If you'd like to continue these conversations with any or all of us, please feel free to reach out and connect with us on LinkedIn or other platforms that we may be available on. You can certainly also book a call with one of us. And I want to also ask, Ashok, where can people connect and find more about how to work with you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn a lot. I have a website called the Empathy Clinic. And I actually have a YouTube channel with about 70 videos up there that I've been working on over the last number of years that share just little nuggets. Nothing's too long, except maybe one or two of them. But I think it's really important that what we're doing is powerful to put the message out and create that space so people can start their journey of healing.
Well, definitely connect with Ashok. Go check out his YouTube page. Connect with us for more high vibe conversations. And until next week, we'll say bye for now.